We are in a series called Zeke Speaks. And this is, we've been going at it for a little while. We're going to have a quick review for some of you who have been in and out, and some of you have been sitting in the chairs, but you also may have been in and out. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of give a brief review. We begin. There have been generations of disobedience. There's an obedience, kind of disobedient cycle going on. And right off the bat, when we started this series, we talked about, okay, if you're going to think about these Legos, first of all, you would say, what about this? These Legos. They're not Legos, right? So if you're going to try and do something with Legos, you can't build a Legos house without Legos. So the point was what? What was the point we made about human beings, and especially the people God was talking to? They didn't do what? They didn't read the instructions, and when they did, they didn't follow the instructions. There were generations of this going on, and so what happened to them and where we are in Ezekiel is they have gone into exile. And I said last week that exile is kind of like rehab. You've gone away for a time to a place to learn something, to change, to be changed, something. There's been an intervention. How many of you ever had an intervention? Look at you. I have had several interventions. It was my dad swooping in on me when I was a kid. Now then, how many of you had some yeah, you know. And you've been to rehab, or maybe you called it timeout. I don't know. But you had to go away to learn a lesson, and that's where they are. They're in exile. And we're going to be in Ezekiel 16 today. We're going to read a little bit of Ezekiel 16. It explains kind of why you had to go to rehab. You didn't just go, you didn't have to just buy a book. You got some problems? Here, read this book. Have any of you ever had somebody do that to you? You got some serious problems? Here, read this book. And usually I want to say, why don't you eat this book, but I got my problems. I don't need a book. But I didn't want rehab, but you had to go. Now, we're going to read this story in Ezekiel 16, parts of it. And one of the challenges, and this is you always should do this in the Bible, find your place in the story. Find your place in the story. If you're finding your place in the story in Ezekiel, you're going to have this tendency to say, I'm bad, but I'm not that bad. I'm not as bad as that, right? Another example of this, the prodigal son. You might think, in the story of the prodigal son, can I find my place in that story? Where am I in that story? Well, in Ezekiel 16, finding your place in the story, you're going to want to say, I'm not that bad, but I want to tell you this. How many of you in the room here, I'm going to ask a question. You raise your hand if you say yes. Jesus died for me. Okay, listen, if Jesus had to die for you, you are that bad. Right? I mean, he doesn't die because you just slipped up and said a cuss word. You drank a beer. He might have said, good job. I don't know. But it wasn't that you did something just a little bit. No, man, you were dead in your sins. That's what we read in Ephesians. You are dead. You are that bad. So find yourself in the story. I'm going to read. You have your handouts there with you. We'll fill in some of those blanks in a minute. But I'm going to read from Ezekiel 16. I'll make a few comments about it. We're going to read the first, starting in verse 2. We'll go ahead and read verse 1 to verse 14. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, confront Jerusalem with her detestable practices and say. Okay, now, you need to think, you're finding yourself in the story, you're Jerusalem. You have detestable practices. That's yuck. Everybody go with me, some yuck. Yuck. I do bad things. This is what the sovereign Lord says to Jerusalem. Your ancestry and birth were in the land of the Canaanites. Your father was an Amorite. Your mother was a Hittite. Okay, you come from bad folk. Your people are not good people. Okay? The day you were born, your cord was not cut. You were not washed with water to make you clean, nor were you rubbed with salt or wrapped in clothes. No one looked on you with pity or had compassion enough to do any of the things for you. Rather, you were thrown out into the open field for the day on the day you were born. You were despised. Think of this. They saw your baby, you're born from your mother. They take you with not cutting you. They got all the blood, all the stuff that comes with having a baby. You just grab that baby and you throw it in the dumpster. That's you. Find yourself in the story. This is you. At your birth, you are so unwanted that you are thrown into a dumpster. Now then, find yourself in that story. Thinking about that. That's where you've come from. Then I passed by and saw you kicking about in your blood. And as you lay there in your blood, I said to you, live. So here comes God walking by, and he sees you in the dumpster, and he says, I want you to live, not die. You are not trash. You are not. I'm going to make you live. And he says, and I made you grow like a plant of the field, and you grew and developed and entered puberty. And your breasts had formed, and your hair had grown, and you were stark naked. Later I passed by, and when I looked at you and saw you were old enough for love, I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your nakedness. And I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant with you, declares the sovereign Lord, and you became mine. Here's this baby is growing up, and while she's vulnerable, God says, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to put my cloak over you. I'm going to take care of you. As you are growing up from baby through puberty, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to protect you. You're vulnerable. I'm going to take care of you. Now, of course, this is an allegory. You know, it's not like this is a Dateline story and I'm seeing this, you know, all this has metaphorical kind of implications. Find yourself in the story. Well, I bathed you, verse 9. I bathed you with water, and I washed the blood from you and put ointments on you, and I clothed you and embroidered with an embroidered dress. That must be a really cool dress. I don't know what, yeah. Vicky says yes, so it's good. It's a great dress. I put sandals of fine leather on you. I dressed you in fine linen and covered you with costly garments. I adorned you with jewelry. I put bracelets on your arms and necklace around your neck, and I put a ring on your nose and earrings in your ears and a beautiful crown on your head. And you were adorned with gold and silver. Your clothes were of fine linen and costly fabric and embroidered cloth. Your food was honey and olive oil and the finest flour, and you became very beautiful and rose to be queen. I just want you to think of this. The dumpster baby is taken care of by God, protected until she gets to puberty. And then as she does, as she begins to become a woman, she is dressed in the finest of fine things, and she becomes the beautiful queen. She began in the dumpster, and she has become the beautiful queen because the king has taken care of her. You with me so far? You're here. Verse 14, and your fame spread among the nations on account of your beauty, and because of your splendor I had given you, made you your beauty perfect. Wow, she was the best of the best. And then verse 15, but you trusted your beauty. You trusted in your own beauty. Whew, this is the downfall for many. So here we go. Number one in your handout. Rescued. Just write the word rescued. Nurtured. The second. Nurtured. And loved. This is who you are. This is how you are. You are rescued by the King. You are nurtured by Him. You are loved by Him. And in this story, Yahweh, God, is a lover. He's a lover. He's the husband in this story. This is a story, a love story. And it's a story between a husband and a wife. And in this story, he is the husband. And he's made this queen who he's rescued and loved, his beautiful queen and wife. But he's also still, even though he's the husband, he's also the creator God. He's also the sovereign Lord. He's in charge of the universe, even though now he is in the role of a husband. And this is his role with you. Let me just say, if you haven't found yourself in the story yet, you're the one who's thrown in the dumpster and been rescued by God. Okay, that's you. And then verse 15 says, but what did you do? You trusted in your own beauty. And when you trusted in your own beauty, what does this mean? Number 3 in your handout. You began to look at yourself and you saw that I forgot we had one of these. You're full of narcissism. You can only look at yourself. You spend your days looking at how great you are. You're wonderful. You're beautiful. Life is about, it's me. Aren't you lucky, Georgie? I'm Bob. Aren't you lucky to know me? Yeah. Aren't you all lucky to have me as your speaker here? Aren't you just the luckiest because you know me and I'm awesome? That's who I am. I'm beautiful too. Let's check this head out. Have you seen one quite so smooth? It's awesome, man. I'm awesome. And materialism, I have the best stuff. My stuff is embroidered. I don't even know what that means, but it must be really good because Vicki said it was. I have the coolest stuff. I'm great. And I have great stuff. I have great amounts. And if I want more, I'll just ask. I can get all I want. I've got the best stuff ever. Nobody has better stuff than me. And if they do, I'm going to go get some more that's better than them. And all this leads to pride. It leads to pride. And so the end of verse 15 says, and so you used your fame to become a prostitute, and you lavished your favors on anyone who passed by, and your beauty became his. So first of all, I have this pride problem, but then I also have this lust problem. And what is lust? I want everybody to say the word because it's not a comfortable word. You know how obey is the kind of word. It's not very sexy, and lust is too sexy. You know what I mean? Lust. Everybody say lust out loud. Lust. It's hard to say. Because you feel dirty, right? Yeah. And it is. Lust, we're going to call it this. An unquenchable thirst for the thing that will not satisfy. This is lust. I want something. I want it. And even when I get it, it's not good enough. I need 2 of them. So my friend Greg, he's playing basketball. He's in high school. He's playing street basketball on a cement court, and it's the kind of game where you get to play if you keep winning. Your team keeps winning, you keep playing. His team keeps winning. He's in high school. His team keeps winning. It's a hot afternoon. He's playing in the afternoon. He lives in Dallas. He's playing in the afternoon. And as he plays, his team keeps winning. And he's never played this good in his life. 2 hours of playing basketball, hard basketball, and he falls over. He's having some problems, right? Some physical problems. And what might you think his physical problem is? He's not a heart attack, but he's got some stroke, some heat stroke, man. And so the guys, they know he can't breathe. He can't breathe. He's huffing for air. They bring him some Coke. A Coke to drink. And he takes a swig of that Coke and spits it out. And actually, the Coke is making him worse. So they bring him some tea. And the tea is no good either. What he needs is water. He needs water. But he's thirsty. The Coke will never quench his thirst, would it? He could drink Coke after Coke after Coke after. This is what lust is. You get all, you think you want it, and you get all you want, and still you want more. You want more. And whether it's money or sex or power, whatever it is, lust, she had it all. The queen in Ezekiel 16, remember, find yourself in the story. She had it all, and it wasn't enough. And so the rabbis for centuries have said, they don't say this now, but there was a period of time where, and I said this last week, you had to be 30 years old to read Ezekiel. Because there are some parts of Ezekiel that are just really pornographic. And chapter 16 is that. So we're not going to read the rest of chapter 16, but I'm going to give it to you for homework. I suggest you read it in the Message. And you have a cold glass of water right next to you. But what happens to her is she begins to prostitute herself. Now, this again is symbolic language, but what God does is the very thing that is horrible for us who are lusting. The most gruesome consequence of sin is for God to give us what we lust for. Okay, so in their case, you want the Babylonians? Okay, then you get the Babylonians. Because that's what you wanted. And I'm going to give it to you. You want it that bad that you're going to turn your back on me? I'm going to give it to you. How would you like it? Well, what does this mean they wanted the Babylonians? Well, here it is. They wanted approval from other nations. Hey, we want approval from other nations, right? I hope Canada, Mexico, Russia, everybody approves of us. But it's not that. I don't want you to take it as nationwide. Think of it as just personally. You want approval from others. I want others to approve of me. And in order to receive approval for, let's say, Egypt, and this is in the story if you read the rest of it, she has to give herself to Egypt. If I want approval from the other nations, I have to really prostitute myself with them. And what does that mean? Well, I adapt their ways. I begin to worship their gods. And so when the Egyptian gods or the gods of or Baal or Molech, when they began to ask their followers to sacrifice children on the altar, God's people began to do that. When they say, let's have sex at church, that'll drive your attendance up, probably. We haven't thought of that. Let's have orgies here at our church. Well, that's what they did, and God's people went along with it. So on the one hand, they got a room where they're burning their babies. And on the other hand, they got a room where they're having sex with the temple prostitute. This is church. This is church. You know why? Because they wanted the approval of the people who worshiped those gods. They wanted the approval of it, and they wanted the money that brought them, the rewards. They wanted the safety that an alliance with Egypt would have for them. And God says, okay, you want it? You want it? I'm going to let you have it. And they did, and he did. Some of us are not that different. You know, you have a dream. I had a dream job, and it was my dream job until I got it. It turned out not so hot. I had a dream girlfriend. Thought this is going to be great. And then I got it, and it wasn't so hot. You know, I had a dream car. Have you ever had a dream car? I had a dream car. So it was really good until I got it, and it wasn't enough. A lot of times what we're asking for is something that's not good for us, or the amount that we want it, it's not good for us, but we want it, and we eventually get it, and it turns on us. And this is what happened. So they suffered. They went into exile. And then God says, here's your problem, because it may not be exactly what you think. You may not have been diagnosed with the right diagnosis of your problem. What was my problem? Well, they got this, and I'm sorry I missed this slide. They were known for their ruthlessness, but the people of Jerusalem were compared to the people of Samaria and Sodom. Later in Ezekiel 16 says, you are just like your sister, calls them sisters. Just like your sister, Sodom, and your sister, Samaria. Now this would be offensive to the Jews in the first place, because they hated the Samaritans. but he's calling them sisters. But it says, he's comparing them and says, you're just like them. Well, the thing is, they were known for their evil ways. They were known for their evil ways, but it says in verse 47, you not only followed their ways and copied their detestable practices, but in all your ways you became more depraved than them. Sodom, Samaria, both they're known for evil. And you were worse than them. You were worse than they were. Well, what did they do? What was their problem? What was the terrible sin? Well, they were arrogant, they were overfed, they were unconcerned, and they did not help the poor and the needy. And I want to say in my way, that doesn't seem that bad. Okay. I'm arrogant, okay. I got a little pride problem. That's not that bad, is it? I'm overfed, means I indulge myself in everything I can get. It's not just about food. So I'm indulged in everything I can get. And I'm unconcerned about others. Is that bad? I didn't murder anybody. I haven't committed adultery with them. But he's comparing that with this prostitute. Why? That doesn't seem that bad. I'm not helping the poor and needy. Does it seem that bad? Remember, Jesus died because you weren't doing these things. Jesus said, this is who you were. This is who you are. Maybe we need to reevaluate what we think is a problem or not, but this was their problem. They were arrogant. They were overfed. They were unconcerned. And they didn't help the poor and the needy. And then, not only that, when Samaria and Sodom suffered the consequence of their evil ways, because they did, they had already suffered the consequences of their pain, of their evil. They've already done that. What happened was, it says you would not even mention your sister Sodom in the day of your pride. Here's the way the ESV says it. It says that Sodom and Samaria became bywords in your mouth. When you talked about them, they were like trash to you in the day of your pride. Because see, at this point, I want you to imagine, we got the three sisters. I'm going to have to use you guys as the three sisters. Stand up. We got the three sisters. And they're all doing bad stuff. Just say bad stuff. Point your finger at them. Yeah, that's right. Okay, these two, they're exposed. Their bad stuff is exposed. This one's doing the same bad stuff they are, but she's not exposed. No one knows. No one knows that she's there, that she's just as terrible as they are. So what she does is, go ahead and have a seat. And at this point, what's happened is an intervention, and she's gone into exile and says, now I'm exposed. I am just as guilty as my two sisters. And all the time I used to talk trash about them. That same trash that I talked about them is now being talked about me. Because now I've been exposed. Check yourself on this one. When others suffer the consequences of their failures, pride produces judgment. Love produces compassion. When you see someone else suffer the consequences of their own failure, are you sad about that or do you cheer? Yeah, that guy needs to go to the electric chair. Hope he dies. Compassion comes from love. Judgment comes from pride. Like, hey, I'm better than him. And all those fingers turning right back at you. Y'all know that one. Yeah. And so the story doesn't end here, even though out of the 60, there are 63 verses, like 62 and a half are all just terrible. Because what's happening here is their sin is being exposed. All right, I want you to think about this. Some of us, and I'm going to tell you this is me, a lot of my life, one of my greatest fears is that I would be exposed. That people would know who I really am and who I really am not. I don't want to be exposed. I'm fearful of being exposed. Sometimes my exposure comes like this. Something I'm doing, I didn't even know it was wrong. Man, there's a lot of hatred and racism in the 50s when I grew up, and we didn't even know it was wrong. Huh? And yet once my eyes are opened, I don't want to be exposed as a racist. And yet I was one. So what do you do when you're exposed? Well, I try to dig a little deeper, hide a little more, blame someone else. This is what she did. She wanted to blame other people. Tell them, hey, I'm bad, but I'm not that bad. Here she is that bad. And the story pretty much ends this way. The turning point in Ezekiel doesn't come for a few more chapters, but there's a little bit of hope here and there sprinkled along the way. Jeremy mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, and here it is today. It ends with this, and God, we started with this, is rich in mercy and love. When we were dead in our sins, made us alive together with Christ. This is where we're headed. This is where Ezekiel actually is headed. But in verse 63, the last verse, and I'm reading again from the Message. It's on your handout too. It says, you will remember your past life. This is at the very end. You will remember your past life and face the shame of it. Now, shame in our culture and our church is not a bad word. This church is not about shame. But Ezekiel's using the term shame in this case to mean this. It's the context, it's a tool that transforms our hearts, and pride gives way to humility. What it means is I've learned a lesson from my failure. I see what I've done wrong, and I look back at myself as a racist, and I say, I wish I had never done or said some of the things I did or said. I wish I'd never done that. But I did. But now what I've learned from it is I'm not going to do that again. Right? Can we learn from our mistake? Can we learn from our mistake? So this is the point he's making here. You'll remember your shame. And then it says, but when I make atonement for you and make everything right after all you've done, this is God. The God who pulled us out of the dumpster when we were still in our afterbirth. He pulled us out. He made us into a queen. We rebelled against him. And he says, even now, I am going to make atonement for you. And I'm going to make everything that you've done. I'm going to make it all right, even after all you've done. And it will leave you speechless. Today, we normally have a closing thought. We're not going to have a closing thought today. But instead, we're going to have a closing song as our closing thought. The situation of God coming to the sisters. And this is the word he uses, one of the words Sally uses in her communion words. He's going to restore them all. He's going to make them all the queens they were meant to be. That's what's going to happen. But it's important to get this, and he does this in Ezekiel and other times too. He clarifies, this is not because of my choice to be a better person. It's because of his choice to forgive me. It's not because of my good intentions. It's because of his promise. He'll make this point over and over and over. I'm not doing this because you're good. I'm doing this because I'm good, God is saying to them. It's not because I'm going to start living a better life. It's because in spite of my behavior, he chose me. He chose me not because I was good, but because he chose me. He looked and said, I don't know if you can shoot a basketball or not. Come on, you're on my side. You're on my team. I'm choosing you. My repentance, it's not because of I repent. It's not because of that. but it's because he has a desire for me to spend eternity with him. And so, why exile? Why? Why exile? What did the Israelites do? Why did they have to become slaves? Here's the point. They were already slaves. They were slaves of lust. They were slaves of pride. They were slaves of sin. And so God sent them into physical slavery so that they could understand that their hearts were already there. This is why some of us need to go to rehab, so that we can see, oh my gosh, I've got problems. I need to address those problems. God sent them to exile so that he could set them free. He sent them into exile so that they could be restored, that their identity could be restored, that they weren't, as the scripture says, whores. They weren't sluts. They were queens. They were designed to be his bride. And he wanted them to know that they were still his bride. So he was willing to do whatever it takes. And whatever it takes is another part to it that you and I experienced that they didn't get to. That experience is Jesus came for us, right? He did whatever it takes. And he'll do whatever it takes. First of all, to get your attention. He will expose your sin to get your attention. But he's also done the unimaginable. He sent Jesus for you. We're going to stand and sing. This song will be our closing thoughts.